coronavirus pandemic put cities around the world in mandate lockdowns, quarantines and social distancing. Meanwhile, social media posts about animals frolicking through deserted cities have enchanted people who are anxiously seeking silver linings. So are these photos and videos real or yet another form of fake news? Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Leila Faromarzi, and in this episode of The Outbreak, we'll see if there is a silver lining in this pandemic for the planet Earth.
A couple of weeks ago, this video went viral. Dolphins in Venice canals. It's been said that due to the outbreak of coronavirus and the nationwide lockdown in Italy, Venice is the clearest it has been in 60 years, and dolphins have been spotted swimming in clearer water. These photos went viral and made headlines as well. Swans had returned to deserted Venetian canals in Italy, and a group of elephants had sauntered through a village in Yunnan, China. These reports of wildlife triumphs in countries hard hit by COVID-19 got hundreds of thousands of retweets. They went viral on Instagram and other social media platforms. People kept saying if there's a silver lining of the pandemic, it was this fact that animals were bouncing back, running free in a human-less world, but it wasn't real. The video and photos were all fake and from other places, but they showed how quickly eye-popping, too-good-to-be-true rumors can spread in times of crisis. While the news about wild animals roaming in the cities were untrue, there are actual images that show the environment is in better shape in the time of coronavirus. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, cities and lives are pulled to a standstill. Instead, our skies and rivers are revealing an unexpected positive outcome to the pandemic. Economic slowdown and reduced travel as a result of government-enforced quarantines has put a dramatic cap on outgoing pollution, and the effects are being seen all over the world. This satellite photo shows China's pollution level in 2019. Take a look at what happened to China's skies in 2020.
我在上地那边嘛，然后感觉上地公园那些附近也是，看天上呢，还有晚上呢能看到星星了。
There are similar photos from other parts of the world that show significant reduction of pollution in the air. Experts say the sudden shift represented the largest scale experiment ever in terms of the reduction of industrial emissions.
Coronavirus is catastrophic, but it opens a new path. What if the frantic rush hours, relentless production of often unneeded or quickly obsolete items, and non-stop consumer spending were to calm? If we invested in renewable energy, electric cars and public transportation, and stopped funding fossil fuels, would we create good jobs and improve health for ourselves and the planet? Joining me in the studio today is Paul Ekins, a professor of Resources and Environment Policy and director of the Institute for Sustainable Resources at University College London. Professor, thanks for joining us on the show. Given the COVID-19 pandemic, there's been a slowdown of megacities and factories and therefore a lessening of air pollution. Do you think this lessening of air pollution will continue after the pandemic subsides?
I think we can always hope that there's going to be less pollution, but the reality is going to be that after the pandemic, there will be a huge resurgence in economic activity, and that's obviously a very good thing because far too many people have had their lives completely disrupted by this, by the pandemic. But what we can hope for is that governments who decide that there's going to be a stimulus package to aid the economic recovery, that they do so in such a way that we start moving the global economy towards a much less pollution-intensive trajectory.
Thanks for that, Professor. Like climate change, a pandemic is outside the experience of today's population. Like climate change, a pandemic develops gradually with small effects at first. But can we say that one is the side effect of the other?
Experts say greenhouse gas emissions are considerably down, as most countries struggling with the pandemic have conducted massive societal intervention to stop the spread of the virus. Air pollution is also down because of decreased driving and less coal burning. The global demand for oil and air travel dampened, and overall global economic growth is under threat. But all of these are strongly linked to greenhouse gas emissions. Nitrogen dioxide is a byproduct of burning fossil fuels that causes respiratory problems. Satellite images have mapped air pollution across Europe and China and revealed a significant drop in nitrogen dioxide concentrations, coinciding with the strict quarantine measures. While it's too early to say for sure, if these trends continue, the coronavirus could join rare company. Since the year 1900, greenhouse gas emissions have risen dramatically. During that period, the escalation of emissions have been nearly constant, with 2019 projected to set yet another record high. And when significant declines have happened, it's usually been because of world wars, sweeping economic contractions, or large-scale geopolitical events, such as the fall of the Soviet Union. The last time global emissions fell noticeably was in the wake of the Great Recession in 2008. But after that, we saw that the Earth was still in danger and the threat of global warming was still in place.
Let's bring our guest again and see what his insights are about this issue. Good to have you back, Professor. Do tell, is there any way to fight climate change given the experiences we've gained, and are we learning anything from the pandemic?
What we can see is that firstly, we can communicate with each other without the amount of traveling that we were inclined to do. And I very much hope that quite a lot of that will persist beyond the end of COVID-19, that we will make greater use of technology and limit our use of aeroplanes and the like, where we can just as easily communicate using digital means. And then secondly, our cities are much more pleasant places to walk about in. Now, many of us are not allowed to walk about in them very much, but when we do walk about in them, they're much cleaner, they're much better for our breathing, they're much more pleasant, they're much safer for our children.
Thanks, Professor. Talk to you again later on the show. We also took to social media to see how people are reacting to this issue. There were a lot of posts on Twitter insisting that COVID-19 is a result of climate change and people need to fundamentally change their system of living. Also, many believe that the virus is nature's response to climate change. But interestingly, there are also those who say the coronavirus is a small thing, the pandemic is nothing compared to climate change. As for now, carbon emissions are down, and scientists estimate that they could fall even further, specifically to pre-World War II levels. But it might not continue to be this way after the pandemic is over. With no permanent structure, the world is likely to return to producing its previous carbon emission levels.
We already mentioned that the last time global emissions fell noticeably was in the wake of the Great Recession from 2008 to 2009. But even in that moment of economic and societal trauma, the global emissions decline was fleeting. Emissions started to rise again almost immediately. Still, if the current emissions contraction that happened first in China spreads around the world and is sustained, then it might cause a similar impact. Experts say in China, emissions have increased for 3 consecutive years until coronavirus paralyzed entire regions. They said if there is a bright side to the coronavirus, it is that the drop in industrial production, manufacturing, and automobile use will produce a noticeable drop in CO2 emissions for at least the first 2 months of the year. A similar thing happened in Europe and will occur in the United States in the near future. The CO2 emissions will drop, but don't expect it to last. In the past crises, including the Great Depression, the oil shortages in the 1970s, and yes, an influenza pandemic in 1918 have spurred drops in emissions before. But those declines proved to be fleeting. After the global economy regained its footing following the last dip during 2008's financial crash, for example, emissions started to rise again almost immediately. There's one more alarming thing: the massive increase in using plastics. Coronavirus upheaval has halted evictions, converted factories into ventilator and hand sanitizer producers, and reshaped lives. The virus also seems to be disrupting something unexpected: plastic bans. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, people, along medical workers, started to use plastic gloves and masks to protect themselves. Using plastic bags in supermarkets have increased as well. If less carbon emissions is good news for the environment, more plastic use is definitely a bad one. This is another kind of pollution, and it's also man-made. The truth is that mankind can't rely on a killer pandemic to save their planet. If we wish to have cleaner air and water, we should help ourselves.
It's a short term, okay, at least there's something improving. If you're asthmatic, it's much nicer to go for a run right now. It's not going to last that long. So as soon as everybody gets back to normal, these emissions are going to start, unless we decide to do something different.
As for now, the decline in emissions happened at the cost of economic fallouts across the world. So it's not entirely good news. The reductions in pollution and emissions should be done with proper planning and without ruining economies.
Let's hope for the best. Paul Ekins is once again with us. Professor, welcome back. Finally, our last question is about the environment and certain industries like the aviation sector. The aviation industry is one of the biggest offenders in carbon emissions, but it's also suffered the most from the virus. It's one of the greatest suffering. What can such industries do to improve their carbon footprints?
Well, there are a lot of potential options. None of them are easy and none of them are cheap. There's the potential for biofuels, obviously. For short flights, there's a potential for batteries, and we can expect batteries to become more able to fly slightly longer flights, but there's nothing on the horizon for intercontinental electric flights. We may be able to use hydrogen for shipping freight in ways that were done in the past. But all these things require a lot of technological development and require a lot of investment.
Thank you, Professor Paul Ekins from London.
Thank you.
That's it for today. Don't forget to watch our next program. I've been Leila Faramarizi, and on behalf of the whole team here, thanks for watching, and look after yourselves and each other.